Typical horror music is filled with abrupt, screeching stings, dissonance, and extreme instrument registers. But how do you write emotional, heartfelt music in the horror genre? Today we're going to take a look at the Newton Brothers' main title theme for The Haunting of Hill House. They did such a great job throughout the series to match their music to the emotions on screen. The show is definitely horror, but the music outside of just the sudden jump scare chords is so memorable and a big reason why I'm such a fan of the show. So the type of music we're going to be looking into isn't outright scary music, but I also wouldn't say that it's just suspenseful either. Instead, it's a mix of suspense with sadness, with childlike wonder that's somehow all around creepy. The reason why we're focusing on this subgenre of horror rather than just scary music is because I think some of the best horror stories are the ones with real and relatable human struggles as opposed to just the ones filled with jump scares. There's something inherently scary about loss and mortality and the unknown. A lot of typical horror music is all about the lead up to that jump scare, and oftentimes most impactful when the music cuts out altogether. But with this more heartfelt, suspenseful horror music, we're going to be zeroing in on the pain that comes with loss. And this is going to be thanks to a combination of the four foundations of music: melody, harmony, rhythm, and orchestration. And if you do want a quick overview on how you can use these four elements to write for different genres of film music, like fantasy, horror, action, then you can download my composer reference guide in the description down below. So let's take a look at how these four foundations are used in the Haunting of Hill House main title sequence. So much of the feeling behind this genre of music is often determined by the harmonic progression, which is why I actually wanted to start with the harmony first rather than just the melody. And one pretty common yet effective practice is the use of tertiary progressions. And this type of progression really focuses on moving in major or minor thirds, with the goal being to introduce unexpected pitches that fall outside of the key. And one of my favorite progressions in this genre is descending in minor triads while the root descends in major thirds. So if we were to go, for example, from C minor to then A flat minor, to then E minor, and we end up on C minor again. So all minor triads, but the root is descending in major thirds. So C to A flat to E to C again. I feel like it's super mysterious and almost dreamlike, and just that 1/6 progression really creates a sense of tension. Now, looking at the progression of the main titles, it doesn't strictly follow a tertiary progression. Instead, it almost follows a basic 4-chord progression, with the key word being almost. Those first 4 chords are E minor, C major, A minor, and D major. So let's just take a listen to that. And the thing is, alone, those chords are really not spooky or horrific or even suspenseful. Honestly, if we were in G major, that would be very close to the 6-4-1-5 progression. But if we listen to that main title sequence, everything from the melody to harmony, orchestration is telling us that it is spooky, that it is suspenseful and emotional. Let's just take a listen to the chord progression so we can easily hear that we're not in G major. E minor, C major, A minor, and D. right? And that's just the first four chords. Clearly, we're nowhere near G major, so let's just assume that we are in some sort of E minor. So let's hear it one more time. So we went from E minor to C major, A minor, D major, and then we're thrown into something different altogether. And actually, using a chord like that D major really helps us modulate away from this E minor key, and we head towards a G minor. That D major is going to become the major 5 chord of G minor, or the minor 1 in a new key. So we go from and then G minor, and then it all repeats. And so the progression from before remains the same, except we go from G minor to E flat to C minor to F. And guess what? That F chord, that F major chord, functions the same way as that D major chord, and it's going to help us modulate away from G minor, and it's going to help us go towards a B flat minor. Now, why is any of this important? How does this connect to what we just discussed with tertiary progressions? We're basically cycling through the same chord progressions and landing in a new key. But if we look closely, we're actually modulating in thirds. And a tertiary progression is all about movement in thirds. We basically go from an E minor chord to a G minor chord to a B flat minor chord, and so on. And this is all just movement in thirds. And I think that the Newton brothers did such a great job at handling the harmony and creating this sense of tension and longing and sadness all right at the start, right in the main titles. And now that we've solidified our harmony, a melody in this genre of music is really going to revolve around chordal tones from the harmonic progression. However, with that said, what makes the melody really spooky is the use of non-chordal tones, right? These are going to be the pitches that fall outside of the chord. So the melody from the main titles are going to start off with a minor third interval from an E to a G, and both are in our chord. So these are chordal tones. But then it's going to fall down to this F sharp, giving us this E minor chord with an added ninth. Then the chord is going to change from an E minor to a C major, but the melody is going to repeat itself. So we go from E minor, E and G, then the chord changes to C major, but that F sharp is really what's going to stand out, really poke out at us. In a C major chord, that is just really gonna create a whole lot of tension and unease. And to be honest, the Newton brothers could have taken the melody a step further and gone down to this D sharp. So we go. But they notably don't do that. Not yet. So when we go from E minor tension is rising, But then we go to A minor. And the melody almost gives us a little bit of relief. We're rising up to the A and then hitting the F sharp again. And that F sharp is actually going to lead us perfectly into the D major chord. Right? D, F sharp, and A. And remember, that D major is supposed to shift us away from E minor altogether. Rise up to the A, and then D major. Right, so that melody is going from that F sharp, and then just to really drive it home, rise up to the A, and rise up to the B flat in a G minor chord. And remember, going from an E minor to that G minor, we're moving in thirds. This is what creates that sense of pain and the longing, and it's really effective in this main title sequence. Then we have the same melody, same chord progression, just in a newer key. So just in G minor. But since we're at the climax of this piece, the Newton brothers are now gonna give us that raised seventh, that F sharp. And just with the use of that one note, it solidifies that we are in a new key, and it really wants to resolve back up to G. So other than that new addition to the melody, it largely is going to remain the same. Then on the other hand, we're actually going to use a counter melody. If we listen compared to the melodic statement, it is going to be a bit more basic, but it really stands out, especially in the piece itself. So that's going to be a B flat to A, B flat, A, C, B flat, A. So in a G minor chord, that B flat is part of the chord. A becomes a non-chord tone. B flat again stays the same. A, non-chord tone. Jump up to C. That is part of the chord. And then resolve down to the A, which is part of the F major chord. And again, that F major chord is going to pivot us away from G minor, and we're going to shift another third to B flat minor. And now this last part of the piece is what's going to ground us in this suspenseful, horror, dramatic genre of music. And now we're in B flat minor. If we were to listen back to the actual piece, there's dissonance, there's trembling strings. It's very reminiscent of what real scary horror music is traditionally like. So just looking at that melody, we're gonna go from B flat to A to G, and then we'll repeat B flat, A to A flat. And that is the subtle change between these two mini melodic lines. And I think that downward chromatic progression going from B flat to A flat is really what creates a sense of unease. So now let's talk rhythm and tempo. Something that's fairly common in this type of music is to have something that's really slow in tempo. You're gonna find maybe roughly 60 to 100 beats per minute. This particular piece is gonna be at around 62 BPM. It is 4/4, so each beat is going to be relatively slow, right? You're gonna only have 62 of them in the span of 60 seconds. But what gives this kind of music its drive is its use of rhythmic subdivisions, ostinatos, and arpeggios. But other than that, we're gonna get a whole lot of sustained whole notes. I broke down what we just saw with our chords and melodies and split it all out based on the bass, the melody, the chords, and the arpeggio. So basically what we saw before, but I really tried stretching it out. Our sustained notes are low register root whole notes, right? And then we have our melody, which is primarily just quarter notes and half notes. Then we have our harmonic progression, which is basically just block chords repeating eighth notes, which is what we see up top. And then our arpeggio, which is a little hard to see, so let's just single that out. This is really gonna outline the chord progression, so everything here right, that's all just repeating what's in a G minor chord, and then we shift to another chord. Right, and that's gonna be our E flat major chord. And this is not exact. This might not be exactly what we see in the actual piece of music, but roughly we are going to get about 6 notes that outline the chord all in one beat, all in one quarter note. Then it'll go down, go back up, go down, and then here we are at the next chord, then next chord again. And then we have the F chord. And that is what really gives this piece of music its flair. And finally, we can look at probably one of my favorite aspects of music, and this is the orchestration. I think this is really where the piece comes together. And so something that's probably good to note, in this kind of suspenseful, dramatic music, typical orchestration will rely on smaller ensembles. You're likely gonna have your strings as your main ensemble, your main section, and then you'll maybe have a little bit of brass or some woodwinds or some percussion, right? But everything else is going to revolve around the strings, and then all the other sections are going to be very limited. Maybe one instrument at a time, definitely not a full orchestra where everything's playing all at once. The idea is you want to create this grand feeling without losing the sense of intimacy. So having just all your brass and woodwinds and strings and big percussion all at one time is probably not what you want to do for this kind of music. So for this particular piece, our main feature is going to be the string section. It really carries the melody, the counter melody, and it has a heavy influence on the mood of the piece. And we are going to use a bit of percussion and some choir, but that's something we'll discuss a bit later on. So for the sake of the video, I did try to create a quick mock-up that breaks down some key orchestral elements that's commonly found in this suspenseful yet heartfelt kind of music. So let's just take a quick listen to this, and then we'll kind of break it down by part. So that was a quick mock-up. So let's just break down what each part, section, instrument is doing. So let me open everything back up. So really throughout most of this piece, the celli and the violas are going to really carry that melody. Let Let me solo you, and here we go. Right, so they're doing the same thing just in octaves, and really they're separated by 2 octaves. And I think having the cellos in such a low register really works well with this dark, moody feeling we're trying to get. And then if we were to take a look at the basses, they just have the root of each chord. You could argue that the basses and the cellos could be doing these notes just in octaves, but I think that with the cellos playing in such a low range, playing that melody, we're getting a very similar dark effect that we would have if they were just in octaves. Another thing you could do was to split out the cellos to play divisi. That way maybe cellos A and the violas could be doing the melody in just 1 octave apart, while cellos B and the basses could be doing just those sustained notes an octave apart. But I really didn't want to thin out the melody, and I think we would get a little too cluttered with everything just an octave away from each other. Then if we were to take a look at the violins, right, these are going to perform that counter melody. When we look at them with the violas, the violin 2s are going to be in close proximity to the viola line, but I really do like the dissonant sound that it creates, especially at somewhere like measure 58. And of course, that violin 1 line is just this lush, sweeping sound that really works well when we shift to G minor. Let's just take a listen to that. Really great. So the viola section does continue with the melody, especially in that second half, but I also added a solo viola to take on the arpeggio. For one thing, I think this range of pitches fits the viola pretty nicely. Also, I specifically chose a solo viola because in the actual recording, it sounds a lot drier, a lot more intimate. And I don't think we would get that same sound if we just gave this to the viola section. Without the full score directly in front of me, it is kind of hard to say. I'm just making these decisions off the top of my head. Maybe you could have played the violas, but divisi, that way half plays the melody, half takes on this arpeggio. It really depends on the number of players you have available to you. I personally just liked the sound of that like crisp solo viola sound, so that's what took this on. And then moving away from the strings, let's take a look at what the piano is doing. It's gonna take those repeated 8th note block chords, and it's just, again, gonna outline the harmonic progression. So this was one kind of just cinematic piano that I have. I think it rings out really well. It's actually the Olafur Arnalds felt grand piano, but the low-end piano hits just weren't aggressive enough for me. So I actually gave them to the Cine piano, which has a bit more of a aggressive hit to it. So that's just the beginning, and then we go. And this is also going to double with the basses. Right? It has just much more of a harsh ring to it. So I just put the 2 pianos together. There's something about that upper range, just repeated chords that really feels kind of spooky, especially in contrast to this low end piano hit. Right? I think in this context, it really feels like you are in like an old haunted house and you find a piano, you dust it off and you start playing. It really does feel like kind of spooky in that sense. And then at the end, we really reach this dramatic section of the piece. For one thing, the piano is going to emphasize those like really hard pressed keys. It almost rings out like bells when someone passes. Then we're going to have the introduction of just percussion, which almost sounds like this really aggressive knocking. And then even at this point, those strings are no longer gonna be lush, not gonna be as beautiful. We're gonna get really tense, dissonant sounds. We're really gonna get a lot of like these extended, uneasy techniques, definitely throw in some tremolo in there. And then the strings are gonna come back in octaves and take on the melody, if you even wanna call it that. And what I love is that once the melody kind of repeats itself, everything is just hollowed out, but we still have those strings, those evolving strings to create the sense of suspense. So let's just hear what that sounds like all together. It cuts off right here. And a real hollow sound. Again, this is me kind of filling in what I heard, trying to just make some educated guesses. For example, I'm using the Olafur Arnold's evolutions for the strings, and that's really what gives us these untraditional articulations. You know, the piano hits you could hear the percussion. So you kind of just fill in the parts with what your ear picks up on. We have similar techniques at the very beginning as well. The actual piece kind of has just this mini introduction where everything is just revolving around this E chord to lead us into that initial E minor. So we're gonna have our low piano hits. We're gonna have some dissonant strings. There's a quick glissandi that I added in. I must have deleted the actual MIDI file, but I bounced it out anyway. And then it repeats. Right, so I thought that was a nice little addition. The glissando just creates this like falling, scratching effect that really works for this genre. And also at the very beginning, I use Olafur Arnold's just to create really untraditional sounds. And then in the actual piece, there is a kind of this high-pitched ring that I heard. It didn't really sound like a string harmonic, so instead I ended up using just this pad, which doesn't really look like much here. So let's just actually look at the audio. And it's really just this one pad that I found. And that's it. That's all I really heard. It's really, really quiet and subtle, but I think it adds this extra layer of creepiness to the piece. And then finally, the last thing that we have is the choir. It's a super soft choir that we only hear in the second half, and it's very, very subtle, similar to the pad that I used. Like, I think the piece could stand on its own without this addition, but I think the sound of a high, soft choir really adds this mysterious, ethereal feeling. And keep in mind, when we listen back, this is hardly noticeable. We're not going for epic choir here. We're really trying to find something super delicate. Really, really nice. And if you were wondering, this is just the Spitfire Labs choir. And so let's just take a listen one more time. So that's my breakdown, analysis, arrangement of the main titles from The Haunting of Hill House. I'm really happy I was actually able to get this video out in time for spooky season. And even though the music itself isn't strictly horror, it's dark and it's suspenseful and it emotionally matches a lot of really great horror films and TV shows that we're seeing a lot of nowadays. So if you do like this kind of breakdown and you want a quick guide for a few different genres, then definitely check out my composer reference guide. It's going to cover the basics on how to write for fantasy, action, horror, and so on. So if you are interested, then definitely check out the link in the description down below. And I also want to give a big shout out to Zach Heidi for his incredible, detailed Logic Pro template. It's what I've used for this video, and I found it to be the perfect foundation to build my own template off of. So if you are looking for that template to just get you going quickly, then I highly recommend Zach's Logic Pro template. I also left a link in the description down below. All right, so I hope you're able to get some value out of today's video. If you did, then definitely check out some of my other reviews, walkthroughs, and other composing videos. So I'll see you over there, and as always, happy composing.